Hello, Barry. It has been a little while. We missed our first episode and I feel terrible about it. But it's good to be back. Episode 42.
Yes, Chad, indeed. We had our first week without a podcast episode, which was sad. But also, I was living vicariously through your photos, and you look like you had an amazing week. So nothing really to complain about from your side, Chad.
No, definitely not. I had the most fantastic week away, kind of escaped, almost felt like I escaped the pandemic, which is really weird. And we'll get to that. We'll get to traveling in a COVID world. But yeah, it was a good week. I hear you yourself as well had some good social interactions last week, starting to feel a bit more human again.
It's been so good, Chad. Things are slowly starting to ease this side, and I feel a lot more like myself, having had some more social interactions, saw some friends. I'm even a little bit sunburnt, which hopefully you won't be able to see if we edit this well enough, but we'll see how that goes. But yeah, it's been a really good week. I'm feeling top of my game, and I'm ready to get into episode 42.
Amazing. And for those of you watching on YouTube, you'll notice Barry's angle is slightly different. We decided to switch things up a little bit, although we have grown to love the African sunset in the background that has, been quite a common theme on the podcast. And we decided let's just change things up a bit, try out a new scene. And also, just if you look at our clothes as well, I'm wearing a mustard shirt and Barry's wearing a nice stripy jersey. We've got to, change it up every now and then.
It feels like season 2, Chad. Doesn't it feel like season 2 to you? It's like we've grown up, we've learnt our lessons, and we're here with new angles, new colors, and a lot of interesting stuff.
Well, welcome back.
Across the pond with Barry and Chad.
The other thing, Barry, is that the tide has started to turn on my gloating days of good London weather. They've started to I can't do them anymore.
I love it, Chad. I love it. You enjoyed those couple weeks, but the African sun will always win out. Don't you worry, Chad. Is it cold that side?
Oh, man. We basically arrived, so left Greece, and it was kind of like 30-odd degrees. I think it was 32 degrees most days. Arrived in a rainy London. I think we had to take the extra long bit of the runway because, you can't slam on brakes when it's that wet on the roads. And it was 12 degrees as well. So yeah, not a nice welcome, not a nice warm welcome. I would have thought, London's missed us, wanted to give us a warm welcome back, but no.
Back to the same old, that traditional London weather, Chad. I must say, like, the last few weeks we've been talking about London weather hasn't sounded like London to me. Whereas when you said this, the 12 degrees, the overcast, that seems more like the UK, at least in my stereotypical mind.
It does. Well, anyway, let's stop talking about that and let's move on to what happened this past week.
The week that was.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Johannesburg, and these are your breaking news stories. Tonight, we found out that Internet Explorer, 25 years old, is finally dead. We cross over to Chad Sturley in London for the latest updates.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you for tuning over. And yes, you are right. We have found that news finally coming through that Microsoft Internet Explorer is finally dead. A lot of people have said that this has been coming for some time. I had some interviews lined up, but the people who I had on my mind are not here to voice their opinions. But you're right. It's over, Barry. It's over for Internet Explorer. What a dramatic intro, but I think needed.
Very much needed, Chad. I think Internet Explorer was one of the symbols of the modern internet, right? One of those very first web browsers. And it comes to an end, like the era is over. For me, I'm a little bit sad because I've been enjoying the memes over the last few years because, of course, Internet Explorer has been getting slower and slower and slower and more bulky. And it doesn't really fit the kind of modern internet. And so Microsoft have finally sunset the product and they're going to move forward with better things going forward. But I'm going to miss the memes, Chad.
Oh, I'm sure the memes will keep coming, Barry, because I'm sure it's ingrained in people's mind. I'm sure you've got people who specialize in Microsoft Internet Explorer memes, and they now have nothing to meme about. So I'm sure they're going to just keep it going. Hopefully, we'll hope. But you're right. I think for a long time, Internet Explorer was, I guess, when it was first introduced, the thing. It was able to interface us, provide an interface to the internet, this, massive world of the internet that a lot of people were unsure what it would be able to do one day. And obviously, as technologies have evolved, I believe Google Chrome is phasing out Flash, the Flash player that we all used to love as well and play various interactive games when we used to be kids, Barry. But that's it. That's the evolution. We now have HTML5. We've got all sorts of new protocols, etc. And it just was not worth them keeping going.
Yeah, one of those things, I think we see this technology becomes obsolete after a while. And 25 years is actually a really good run if you think about it. like most software, most products don't last that long. And so for it to last 25 years is really a testament to how important it was. And in the beginning of the PC world, when Microsoft had a complete domination over the markets and owned like 97%, Internet Explorer was that default setting. And it was, like you say, the portal to the rest of the world, which is really exciting. And so it does feel like the end of an era. It's almost like a Steve Jobs leaving Apple kind of feeling in some cases, because that little E we used to click on all the time, that was like so symbolic of what the internet had to offer. And if you look at the internet of 25 years ago versus the internet of today, I mean, you wouldn't believe it, Chad.
Absolute stark difference. I mean, 25 years ago, I was only 3 years old, which is an insane thought. And yeah, like you said, quite a resilient bit of software that to have kept going for this long. I'm sure Bill Gates will be proud on that front. What else happened this past week, Barry? Something pretty big happened that side in South Africa, obviously on one of our favorite topics, which is data, personal data. Tell us about it.
Yeah, Chad, a really, really big news aside, potentially the biggest data breach we've ever seen here in the country, here in South Africa. So really was like big headline news when it happened, and the country's had about a week or so to kind of deal with it, and so there's been some updates to the original story. But basically, there's a big credit bureau here in the country called Experian, and they are one of the major market leaders. They hold a lot of credit information when people are looking for credit scores and insurance and that sort of thing here in the country. And so a lot of the big banks use them to hold their credit data. And so they have millions and millions and millions of people's worth of sensitive personal information.
Yeah.
And what happened, Chad, was that a lot of those pieces of data got stolen, basically. So it sounds like 24 million South Africans were affected. 750,000 businesses had their information stolen. And that included ID numbers, residential addresses, physical addresses, and contact details, right? And what we normally think about when we think of these kind of hacks, we've talked about hacks in the past.
Yeah.
This wasn't like a very sophisticated like hack from a Russian spy bot that infiltrated the systems or anything. It was willingly handed over by Experian on a flash drive to some con man who was impersonating one of their clients, basically. And so they willingly handed over all of this data to this guy, and about a month later realized, hold on a minute, that actually was a fraudulent use of that data, and then try to backtrack and try to figure it out. So a really big breach, Chad.
Absolutely. What a massive, massive breach. And just that story of it being, not a sophisticated attack, nothing like that. It rings true to a book that I've been reading, and one that I think I'll bring up a little bit later on, in the future with some of the very specific points. But if we do go into this tiny little rabbit hole, if you indulge me for a second, Barry, is this idea of the humans and our affinity to truth default. So basically in this book, which is the book called Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell, and essentially he basically presents a whole bunch of cases to you. One of them was a Cuban spy, a spy that had been in the American, I think it's called the DIA, if that's the word. It might be the wrong one. But essentially, a spy that had been given a medal by Fidel Castro himself, and that a lot of people loved and thought was really good at her job, etc., etc. And it's just because of our affinity to default to truth. Unless we have enough switches that flick up, and apparently that's quite a high threshold, before we start questioning things that don't seem right or don't seem a-okay. So that just rings true to this, and I guess that's exactly what happened here. And it's crazy to think how many people have been affected on the back of this because of something so silly. It really is crazy. The more and more cases that he presents forward in this book, you just realize that as humans, we're wired that way. And obviously there is, evolutionary reasons for it, but it's just a crazy thought.
Yeah, it's one of those interesting pieces of cybersecurity is that no matter how good your system is technically, no matter how good your software is or the way it's designed or any of the cybersecurity measures, there's always humans involved in the process.
Yep.
And so there's always weaknesses at those human interaction points. Because like you say, we want to believe people. I mean,
Yep.
it would be a horrible world to go in if you distrusted every single thing you heard. I mean, you wouldn't know
100%.
what to do with the world,
Yep.
right? So we kind of default to understanding, cool, I'm just going to go with this guy until he gives me reason to distrust him or gives me reason to think otherwise. I'm just going to accept what he's saying is true. And we kind of have to live like that in that society. But what it does is it opens up opportunities for con men, for liars, for people who deceive to get away with certain things like this. And so, yeah, it's a weird one, Chad, but it has very serious implications. Like a breach like this can affect so many people and so many unsuspecting consumers if they're not aware of it or if they don't realize that this is out there. They may end up losing money down the line as people start to impersonate each other, as people
Yep.
start to do fraudulent activity, try and do phishing and all that kind of stuff. to pull money out of people's pockets, it can be really bad. So we have to think about this really carefully about the way our humans interact with our systems, and not only protecting the cybersecurity side, but also training our people to ensure that we're doing the right things when it comes to the human processes, because that's almost as important.
Okay, so now you are a South African and you fear you might be one of the 24 million that Barry has mentioned. I mean, what do you do at this point? Your information is out there. It's not like you can all go and apply for a new ID number or, move houses so that it's not applicable anymore. What do you do at this point?
I think the first thing is not to panic. Like, we
Yep.
must remember, they don't have your login details, they don't have your banking details or any of that stuff. So don't panic, first of all. That's the first thing.
Yep.
My second suggestion would be go and chat to your bank. I know some of the banks have got lists of the exact customers they have been breached. So maybe
Yep.
email your bank, phone your bank, and just check, have my information been leaked? I'm not sure if they can tell you I don't know how that works. Maybe they can tell you exactly if you're the one of the people. But just maybe check with them. And then the third piece is the same thing we say all the time, Chad, about things like just be careful and be cautious. Don't give away your one-time PIN to someone over the phone. Don't give personal information away over the phone. Like, make sure that if you're dealing with someone from a bank or from a insurance company or something, do your checks to make sure they're legit before you give away any personal information. Because
Yep.
what they're going to try and do is they're going to try and now impersonate these people. They might phone a customer and say, listen, hi Joe Blogs, your ID number is this and this and this. There's been a problem with your online banking. We need to change the password. Can you just help me out? What is your old password? And they'll help
Yep.
you change it over the phone. And then they have access to your banking accounts. And so the only thing you can do is just be aware that those scams exist and know that no one's ever going to ask you for your password or your one-time PIN or any of that stuff over the phone. If you can hold yourself to that, there's nothing that these people can do with the information, or nothing nefarious at least.
Right. Okay. So common logic prevails. We just keep our wits about us, I guess, and just practice smart, I guess, authentication, smart, password practices, and all of that kind of stuff, and just remain diligent as well. No one's going to phone you to ask you to reset your bank password, so just try and keep that normal logic going. Just in terms of a bit more of the story, Barry. So now, as you said, it's been a couple of weeks before the story broke out. We now have a bit more idea of when it happened, the kind of timelines, when it was found out, when it was enacted upon, all of that kind of stuff. Why don't you talk us through that?
Yeah, so obviously they've been investigating what happened and trying to figure out exactly how it all played out. And it looks like the actual breach happened in May, which was a
Right.
while ago, Chad. And that's a bit
Yeah.
worrying. Apparently, the company only detected the breach about 2 months later on the 22nd of July. And they went to the courts and applied for what's called an Anton Pillar court order.
Okay.
And as far as I understand, this is like it's a court order to look for suspects but keep it under wraps, because obviously you don't want the person who's breached to know that you're onto them.
Right.
And so this court order went out. They did a bunch of investigations, and they found a suspect who they're pretty sure was the one who got the data. And so, as far as I understand, that suspect has been arrested and has been all his goods have been repossessed, and the
Okay.
data's been deleted apparently and whatnot. So they think they've got the person. They think they've got the guy, which is a good thing. But you've got no idea what he did with the data in between those 2 months, right? And you've got no idea where that data might be elsewhere. If I'm a criminal, I'm not just leaving it on my laptop. I'm making backups. I'm sending it elsewhere. I'm doing other stuff as well. So who knows what's happened? But as far as I understand, they have found who they think was the person was, and they are trying to kind of put him behind bars. The second thing is that obviously, from a civilian like myself, I want to see Experian face some punishment for this, right?
Sure.
Because of their negligence.
Yeah.
And this is where things get a little bit tricky, because I think all South Africans will know of what's called the POPI Act, the Protection of Personal Information Act. It's like the big data privacy law that came into the country a couple of years ago.
Yep.
And I kind of assumed, Chad, that it was already in full effect, because so many people talk about it, and it's been talking about it for a while now.
Yep.
And I found out through investigating this story is that it's not fully in effect just yet. So if it was fully in effect, what Experian would face would be fines. I think it's up to about 10 million rand fine for negligence, as well as their directors might actually face imprisonment if it was found to
Sure.
be severely negligent. So serious consequences here. But POPI isn't actually in effect yet. What happens is the companies have until the 1st of July in 2021 to align with POPI. So obviously,
Okay.
whenever you bring out new legislation, you have to give people time to rejig their systems and
Yep.
rechange their processes and get into a position where they're ready to comply with it. And that period we're still in as South Africans. And so I don't know if Experian are going to face anything from this, because previously there was no real legislation to deal with this sort of data breach. And at the end of the day, it might only be seen as a criminal case with the guy who stole the data. versus a negligence case of Experian itself. And I find that a bit worrying and a bit sad.
Yeah.
But I suppose it's how legislation has to work. You can't just say, okay, tomorrow you have to change all your systems to deal with all this new regulation. I don't know what you think, Chad.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's one of those where we just talking about technical terms. I think, if we were to just ask the ordinary person on the street what their thoughts was, I mean, obviously they were negligent here. They just handed this information over without doing proper due diligence on where it was going. And ultimately, they are aware of this POPI Act. They're aware of these requirements. So the fact that technically speaking, they didn't fall within that period, I don't know. I really, really think it's just a poor case of timing for all the consumers whose data was included in this breach. And I just hope we hear a little bit more on the story. And hopefully the guy who they suspect being guilty on this one, they're able to ultimately wrap up their trial and all that data has been seized. I think that's the key thing here. So shall we move on then, Barry? I wanted to chat a little bit about the Apple versus Epic Games case that happened this past week in court. Now, I remember you mentioned this particular person's Ben Thompson with his newsletter, Strategy. I don't know if that's the right way of saying it. And I've actually signed up to it as well. And it's been coming through my inbox. But they're not light reads. You definitely need a bit of time to wean your way through it.
I don't know how he does it, Chad, because I'm on the free version, which is once a week, but there's a paid version where I think it's 3 or 4 times a week. I have no idea how he writes this much depth, like you say, such technical stuff, such well-researched stuff, on a 3 to 4 times a week basis. It's absolutely amazing. And it's one of my favorite blogs because his writing is world-class. And so I'd encourage you to just dig through the details, dig through the depths on the topics that matter to you, because I don't know of another tech reviewer or tech journalist that is writing better stuff right now than Ben Thompson. He really is world-class.
Amazing. Well, yeah, I think I do need to just give a bit more time there and actually read through some of the stuff, because I guess it's one of those things. It's one of those where the email app for me is emails. I don't typically or haven't typically received or, signed up to too many newsletters apart from yours, Barry. So when it comes to actually reading through a newsletter in the email, my mental state when it comes to reading through it is reading short form stuff, where I don't know if that's just maybe a mental shift that is needed. Do you go onto his actual blog and read it there, or do you actually read it through in your email app?
So what I do is I have an app called Pocket, which saves things for offline reading. So any articles I find, any blog posts I find, any newsletters I find, I'll go through my emails and I'll save the links into Pocket. What that then does is it downloads it in an offline fashion. So then I can read it on my phone, I can read it on my laptop without needing the internet. And that helps me to try and avoid the distractions of trying to read on the internet. I find if I was to go to someone's blog and start reading a post, within 3 seconds there's something distracting and I click and I click and I click. And before you know it, you're on some Wikipedia page of some old Roman emperor. And you're like, how did I get here? How did I get here? And so I find those kind of offline reading apps very popular, so very, very useful at least. So there's Pocket, there's Instapaper, there's Readwise, there's a whole bunch of them.
Okay.
But that's what I recommend. So I've got a whole bunch of newsletters that come into my email inbox. I scroll through, I delete the ones that don't look interesting. Any ones that do look interesting, I'll save to offline. And then every now and then, once every 2 or 3 days, I'll go through all my offline articles and I'll spend 2 or 3 hours reading them as if I was reading a book, but going through all the various blogs and articles that I've found. Because I think for me, there's so much good stuff happening in the blog world that can really be useful for your career, for your personal life, for any of that stuff. And treating it with seriousness and not trying to read it on your phone while you're on the toilet or on the subway or whatever. I think it actually goes a long way.
Yeah, I think that's important. That would definitely help with this mental shift that I'm talking about, because like you, I get very distracted when it's in a browser or when it's in an email app. I don't know what it is. It is weird. But thanks for all those resources. We'll definitely have to check them out. Okay, so tell us about this, based on what you've read through. What did you find out?
Yeah, so it follows on to an ongoing story we've chatted about a little bit in the past, which is Apple's App Store ecosystem.
Yeah.
And about the commission that they are just grabbing from all of their App Store creators and the drama around that. So for those who are coming to this for the first time, Apple obviously has this dominant App Store, which has created this whole ecosystem of really talented developers creating apps for all shapes and sizes across the market, and really have made it a real economy in that app store. But there's lots and lots of money, millions and millions and millions of dollars every single month. And what happens is that Apple charge you a premium price for the honor of being on the app store, right? So if they accept you and they let you into their app store, they want to take 30% of everything that you earn as an app developer. Now, 30% is a steep price, but at the same time, when you've got a company like Apple, which owns so many devices around the world and is one of the dominant players in the market, you don't have many other options. If you want to get your
Yeah.
app in front of people, Apple's got those eyeballs, right? And so you you suck it up and you pay the 30% and you move on. Over time, people are getting more and more frustrated about this because a lot of apps, they might not need the App Store in order to develop, right? They might just use it as a place for people to go to the app. They might have other payment methods they'd like to use. But Apple forces you to use their payment methods. It forces you to use their in-app purchases, which means they get their 30%. And so over time, companies have started to push back a little bit and trying to kind of use some of their weight to push back on some of the rules. And the latest one of these is Epic Games. And you might not know Epic Games, but you definitely know the game Fortnite,
Definitely.
which is, I think, is the biggest game in the world. It has been for the last few years at least. And so Fortnite is a monster. It has millions and millions and millions of daily active users.
Yep.
It is a phenomenon, right? And so when Epic Games decided that, hold on a minute, we're going to try and put some pressure on here. So as far as I understand, they sent a letter to Apple saying that they're going to be installing a payment method inside of the game that isn't an Apple in-app purchase.
Ugh,
And so they sent the
bold.
letter. Yeah, very bold. I mean, who sent that to Apple? That's great. Apple, as expected, immediately removed them from the App Store. And Epic Games had a lawsuit literally waiting. They'd obviously planned this whole strategy. They knew exactly
Yep.
what Apple was going to do. And the moment it was removed from the App Store, Epic Games put a lawsuit down against Apple almost immediately. And so they really started the ball rolling. And what more than that, Chad, was a bit of an FU to Apple. They made this ad, which was a parody of Apple's famous 1984 commercial against Microsoft back in Steve Jobs' days, of the kind of the giant coming in over the auditorium and smashing the ground and whatnot, that famous Apple ad that we all know and love. They made a parody of that about this whole thing. So they're going to use this for publicity till the cows come home. And that started this giant snowball effect talking about what are the ethics of this app store? Is Apple in their right to hold this 30% commission? And what is it going to mean for the future of the app store? I think this is going to be an ongoing story, Chad, because something has to give here. Something has to change, in my opinion.
Yeah, the timing of this is so interesting because we've been talking about this increasingly over the last, I'm going to say 4 to 5 weeks. So to actually hear it coming about, and this particular case coming about in the last, week or two, is crazy just in terms of that timing. Barry, to go a little bit off the rails here, have you played Fortnite? Do you know much about it?
I have played once,
Okay.
but I don't know. I don't know enough about it. I've watched some streams about it because obviously
Okay.
it's a huge game, but I haven't played much. No, have you?
It's something that I know very little to nothing about. I've never played the game myself. Like you, I know it's huge, and I've, obviously we had Nat Chats on here. I think she plays Fortnite's one of her big games. Yeah, it just is such a big game. But obviously for an app like that is able to have, I guess, a very, very big user base on consoles and I guess on, PCs, Macs, etc. For them, iOS, I'm guessing, would not be, the biggest chunk of that. So they're able to move their weight around, I guess, a little bit more on this. But it is interesting that the wider debate gets, I guess, put to the front here, and we get to talk about the more important thing. So based on feeling, based on what Ben Thompson has to say, do you think Apple's going to be budging at all, whether it is in the near or short-term future?
I don't know, Chad. I don't think so, to be honest. They've got such a strong market position, right? It's very challenging for anyone to push them off that, because even if Epic Games pull their app from their store, there's still millions and millions of others that don't have the position to be able to do that, right? So Epic Games, like you say, is in a position where it's big enough, it's got enough weight behind it, it can afford to not be on Apple's ecosystem. But there's so many other developers that have to be there. And so if there's no other competition, if there's no other kind of reason for them to do it, then it's only public opinion that's going to move them. And if you know anything about Apple, it's that they don't care what the public opinion is, right? They just do what is best, what they think is best with user experience. And they have a point. It's not like it's a completely one-sided argument, right? There's a reason that people love Apple, and that's because their stuff works. Their apps always work because they're so very specific and closed about their ecosystem. So there's never viruses, there's never problems with the Apple apps. And people forget about that because if you're on Apple for long enough, you forget the Windows days when the antivirus stuff and all the chaos you have to deal with, right? And so I know I sound like an Apple fanboy, I know. but it's the truth. And that's one of the strengths of Apple. And so it's not a one-sided debate. This, I understand that the idea that 30% might be too much, and maybe the number needs to come down slightly. But at the same time, if you've got an ecosystem like that they've built from the ground up, it's going to be very hard to convince them to give up any of that competitive ground.
Definitely, definitely is. And I guess we've addressed both sides of this debate before. I don't think we need to go to it too extensively before. But I think it is really interesting just to highlight I guess, the scale of what this kind of legal challenge in court is going to be. You got Epic Games on the one side of the ring and Apple on the other. It really is, for me, going to be a massive, massive game to watch out on. And we'll certainly have to see who comes out on top of that one. Just in terms of some interesting things in terms of the current regulations, I saw you made a point here, which I think is very, very interesting and worth certainly noting, about the current rules, the current case of the App Store, and what sort of apps may be limited by these current rules.
Yeah, so it wasn't my point actually. It was a point from one of the original iPhone team from Apple. So a guy called Francisco Tomolsky, who was on the original iPhone team. And the point that he made was that the current rules are so restrictive as to what you can do on the Apple device that he doesn't think that a launch of a web browser would be possible in today's world. So if you think about the idea that a web browser is kind of this portal to the rest of the internet, and it really is a phone within a phone, if you think about it like that, today's rules wouldn't have allowed that if you went back 25 years to when Internet Explorer was out, right? And so his point is that what innovations might we be missing out on because the whole of the Apple developer ecosystem can't innovate on certain core functionality when it comes to web browsing, when it comes to payments, when it comes to integrating with different ecosystems, with different smart speakers and all that good stuff. So that's, again, it's one of the problems with a closed ecosystem is that you don't know what you're missing out on. One of the beautiful things about Android is that developers can build literally whatever they want. They can change home screens, buttons, sounds, like they can integrate with anything and everything, and they can create interesting things. And his point, Tomolsky's point, was that maybe Apple's kind of short-term focus on keeping this as closed as possible and keeping it as secure and private as possible might be a downfall if the new innovation all of a sudden doesn't come to Apple first, but goes somewhere else first, because they're not looking for that new kind of thinking. And I think it's a very, very well-made point, and certainly something to think about. What is the next kind of step in software technology going to be? And are Apple going to be able to do it if it doesn't come from internally? If it comes externally and they can't integrate it into their current rule book, then what happens?
It is an interesting point, and it is fascinating to think about. Because you're right. I think we obviously only know of what is currently on the App Store. It's always hard to figure out, on a completeness point of view, what else is out there? What else could we be getting? Unless you know somebody who is ingrained in the Android ecosystem. And you and I, Barry, we are our fanboys, so we are very much stuck where we are. But I mean, I was actually quite surprised when we talked about the Spotify debate. I honestly thought the integrations there wouldn't even work because of how we know how closed off this ecosystem is. And so it is really interesting to be able to think of all the other possible use cases. I guess when it comes to artificial intelligence and it comes to cloud computing, all of those kinds of things, I think that's maybe where we need to start shifting our focus on this front, because potentially that's where some more innovations are going to come. When I arrived back home and I was on YouTube, funny enough, in my typical rabbit hole on that platform, I came across a video that was really surprising to me. And I guess it might be semi-relevant to mention here because we are talking about a games developer. And that is, if you have an iPad and a PlayStation 4, you can play your PlayStation from anywhere in the world on your iPad with your PlayStation controller, which I thought was fascinating.
That's really cool. I think it points to a trend that we're seeing. I think the future of streaming gaming is coming pretty quickly. If you look at the Google Stadia concepts and the idea that one day you're going to be able to host your game, your console in the cloud and kind of play it over a streaming service, that's the trend. And so that makes a lot of sense. And for me, that is interesting because it certainly does. It's a bit of a mission to lug your PS4 around if you want to take it with you on a holiday or whatever the story is. So if you were able to play it remotely, that would be interesting. But obviously, they've got to fix the lag and make sure the latency is very, very low, especially if you're playing games like Fortnite, which require you to be like to the millisecond.
Absolutely. I mean, I need to try it out. I need to see whether latency is an issue or not. But for me, it's just one more extra case that if somebody who has a PlayStation 4 and is thinking of maybe getting an iPad, there's just an extra wonderful use case there. You could be, I don't know, you could have some downtime in a coffee shop, and as long as you got your PS4 controller with you, you can literally take out your iPad and play as if you were at home, which I think is really cool. I mean, obviously, we know there's some limitations on games on iOS, although they have been getting really good, to be fair, in terms of graphics and performance and all that kind of stuff. But to have access to your console over an internet connection, for me, is just really awesome. And I mean, yeah, I guess that just wraps up our discussion on Apple versus Epic Games. We'll have to see what happens on that going forward. So to just take a step or two back towards what I was doing last week, obviously we mentioned I was in Greece and we should have recorded an episode. I promised we would record an episode and we didn't. But it is, I guess, important, Barry, to disconnect completely from your day to day. Actually, be able to relax, be able to smell some fresh air and do all of those good things. So I wanted to chat a little bit about traveling in a COVID world. I think for a lot of people, when you think about travel, when you think about how this pandemic actually became a pandemic and spread from China to every end of the globe, travel is essentially the key thing. So for a lot of people, there's a lot of fear there behind getting out, getting onto a plane. There's a lot of fear around that whole process. So I just wanted to chat about my, I guess, observations around this. And first things first, going through to the airport, it was pretty much completely normal, aside from wearing a face mask. It was fairly busy when I went, but in terms of, I guess, the clogged up areas, going through your customs and all of that kind of stuff, that was definitely smooth sailing. So, the airport is still, there's lots of people going in and out there. I think the sentiment's starting to change a little bit and people are starting to feel a bit more comfortable. In terms of on the plane, initially I had expected me to be, super hectic about having people next to me, about just being in, I guess, a compartment in the middle of the sky with people breathing and that same air kind of churning around, etc., etc. But funny enough, that face mask, for some reason, whether it's mental or whatever the case is really reassuring. Do you find that, Barry?
I do, Chad. I do. I think it's become our kind of our suit of armor, right?
Yeah.
We kind of put the mask on, get out of our car and go into our normal lives, and things slowly start to be feeling more natural, at least in my perspective. I obviously haven't been on a plane, so it's very cool to hear that you didn't feel super paranoid.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a range of emotions, though. I'm sure some people do feel paranoid or do feel a bit worried about things, and they must sanitize everything when they get to the seat.
Yep.
Did you kind of sanitize your seat and the front, Chad, and all the stuff around you, or you just like live and let die?
No, so I flew with British Airways, and funny enough, they actually give out a little pack. I expected it to be more of a pack because I'd heard a little bit more of it. I actually heard at some stage they were giving away face masks and that kind of stuff, but it wasn't. It was one tiny little sanitary wipe kind of thing and a tiny little sachet of hand sanitizer. That's all you got for your whole flight. It was a 3-hour flight. And yes, every time I did use it, I sanitized around. The strange thing for me was that they actually gave every single person a snack. So traditionally on a British Airways flight, you'd be able to order from a catalog, which is Marks and Spencer. That is very similar to the Woolworths you would have in South Africa. And you'd be able to order things off the menu and pay as usual. Whereas they decided they were going to give every single person a packet of crisps, 2 biscuits, a little thing of water. And so for me, that was the interesting thing, was the challenge, I guess, at eating with a face mask on. You can't, so you have to take the face mask off at some point. And I guess when you do, you realize how much you actually count on this thing to protect you. And so that was a little bit strange.
Chad, I had such an embarrassing story the other day. Whereas you got this face mask on, and sometimes you've had it on for so long that you kind of forget, right? And so I was walking around the park, I had my bottle of water in my hand and whatever, and I was walking, and I was like, I feel a bit thirsty. I think it's time for a bit of water. And I put it up to my mouth and tried to drink through my mask. And I had a little of a moment. I'm like, what an idiot. What? And I was hoping no one had see me around. And it was a horrible moment. But I know that feeling because, again, you got to take the mask off, quickly eat, quickly drink, put it back on. It's a whole new world.
That's a hilarious story, Barry. So did you actually let the water go out onto your mask or did you catch yourself in time?
Luckily not. Luckily, I didn't do like a down the whole water bottle. So it was manageable. I didn't pour water all over myself, but I did feel like a real idiot.
Oh my gosh. No, fair enough. I completely get that. Well, anyway, then we arrived in Greece, and essentially, I guess every single country's got different requirements, right? So in Greece, 48 hours before your flight, you have to fill in a form that essentially says where you're going to be staying the first couple of days, where you're coming from, etc., etc. And they give you a QR code as well that you need to, I guess, scan when you get that side. And on a random basis, people are tested for COVID. So I guess you going through the queue, you're not sure whether you're going to get this test or not. Obviously, no one minds, I guess, testing from I don't know, cooperating kind of point of view, but it's more from the discomfort of having this thing shoved up your nose. So there was a lot of fear in that line. I think a lot of people were wondering whether they were going to be called out or not. And funny enough, the two groups of families in front of me were, and they were not pleased.
Oh.
But I guess the thing is, if you have been carrying this virus and you haven't had any symptoms, the thing is, once you arrive, you do have to quarantine then for 2 weeks. If you are tested positive, that is the one thing. So anyway, luckily we were able to go out, have our holiday. And this is the thing, Barry. So right at the beginning of the episode, I mentioned I felt like I had escaped the pandemic just because we were on this island. I think they've only had 3 cases or something like that. Maybe I'm wrong. But it certainly was not too intense. Face masks when you're in the shop. Other than that, generally you rent your own car. When you're on the beach, you don't have to wear a face mask or anything like that. When you're walking around outside, it's all good. And so for me, it really did feel like I've escaped. And so to be back in London feels a bit strange.
Yeah, I looked at your photos and you look like you're having a great time. And I like the idea that you felt that you escaped. I went to Kimberley this past weekend and I also felt the same.
Right.
Not the same kind of level of scenery as Greece. But at the same time, I felt like I got away from the same place I've been living for so long. We've all been locked in our houses for months and months and months and months. And so just this change of scenery, a new kind of perspective, some new food, some new places to explore.
Definitely.
That must have been so refueling for the soul.
Definitely. You return back with this flame that is ignited again. You're able to get back to the day-to-day, and I guess we've all just been locked up in our houses. It's really nice to disconnect for a week. And for me, if you have the opportunity to take a week away, and if the government allows, wherever it is that you're staying in the world, I really think you should do it. I honestly do. Because let's face it, let's be honest. A lot has happened this year, and we don't know when we're going to be able to go for a holiday like this again.
Yeah, we've realized how much you take for granted.
Yep.
How much you take for granted the idea of just being able to move around at your will, to be able to explore new places, to jump on a plane and in a few hours be somewhere completely different culturally. So if you have that chance, if you have that choice, do it responsibly, do it with caution.
Definitely.
But I promise you it'll be really good for your mental health. It really will be great. And I think it'll just help you realize that we are getting towards the light. The light is there. It really is there. And as humans, we will overcome the chaos of the last 6 months.
Absolutely. I completely agree, Barry. Well, one of the chaos things that happened this past week, and it really was an absolute tragic bit of news to come through. And, I guess wherever you were in the world, this person, I guess the achievements that he's had, and to hear that Chadwick Boseman dies of cancer at the young age of 43 was absolutely devastating. I think the thing here is that the majority of people who knew and loved him and his work didn't know that he had cancer, and he's just been battling it sort of silently throughout the years. He's been acting in these lead roles, breaking new ground in terms of race and diversity and all that kind of stuff. And he's just been kind of trudging along, even though being on chemotherapy and all that kind of stuff. Devastating news, Barry.
Yeah, definitely. It really was a sad one. And it was yet another one of these blows that 2020 keeps hitting us across the face with. He really was an icon, right? And not only a great actor and a really important actor, but a great person as well. If you listen to any of his speeches or his interviews, he's so well spoken, he's so humble, he's so down to earth.
Yep.
A really, really amazing guy. And like you say, he broke new barriers. He was the very first black superhero. Of course, his biggest role was playing the lead in Black Panther, which was a phenomenon. One of my favorite movies of all time, to be honest. And a real breakthrough for the Marvel universe and for superheroes in general. And he has been this inspiration. There are so many black kids around the world who can look up to this guy and say, I can be a superhero too. And that is so, so important, a really big legacy. And like you say, to do all of this while having cancer is a superhuman effort. Excuse the pun.
It is. It definitely is. Just fascinating, I guess, how people, once they've got their eye on a goal and they just go for it, they just go through any obstacle that comes in their way. And something like cancer really isn't something to be played around with. So, like you say, a superhuman effort indeed.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I wonder what his mind was like knowing that he had limited time.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of the hunger and the emotion and the skill and knowing he wants to leave a mark on this world must have come from the idea that he knew he had this in the background. He knew that his time was limited.
Yeah.
And it's almost one of those things. I wish we could all realize that our time is limited, right? Because even if we don't have cancer right now, we know that we only have X amount of years left. And if we were able to live like that, if we were able to really understand that every single second is precious. Every single hour that we do something, all the time we spend with friends and family, and the things we chase and all that, that is precious, and we shouldn't take it for granted. And that's what I'm hoping stories like this and legacies like Chadwick's will bring into the world, is that during that time, he knew his time was limited, and he put out some incredible art that will stand the test of time. And we should be able to do that for ourselves, Chad.
Definitely, definitely. One of the things we were talking about offline just before we started hitting record was the various fears that we come across in, whatever our pursuits are. Sometimes we've got the goal and we know where we want to go, but it's just so easy for these fears to creep in. And I guess when you are in this kind of position, when you know what your fate is going to be, for some reason it's easier to shut off those fears. But you're completely right. Why can't we all get ourselves into that kind of mental state and just live for the moment, live for the life that is a short life. Even a normal life is a short life. Appreciate the moments, appreciate the time you have, and use the skills that you have without worrying about all of these fears that creep in.
Without a doubt. And it's something that I hope we can carry forward, especially after this pandemic, because a lot of the fears are similar to what we felt in this pandemic. And I wrote a post on my newsletter that came out this Monday talking about how we have to learn from what's happened in the last 6 months. If we just go back to normal and we forget about what's gone on and we forget about how we felt during this lockdown period, then we haven't really learned from what we've been through. And so if you can look at Chadwick Boseman's story and learn something from that, that's how it's going to push you to be a better person. And hopefully we keep that in our minds and we don't get into that same old habit of playing the status games and worrying about our appearance and worrying about what other people think about us, and rather just focusing on doing what we're put on this planet to do at the best of our abilities. And please guys, listen to that and let's all hold each other accountable and do it.
Absolutely. What better place to move on to the next segment?
Stuff I found interesting.
Alrighty, so I think I threw this in, it was 2 weeks ago. I know we were supposed to record last week, Barry. And it was basically a little story that I came across that I giggled. I thought it was so funny. I thought it was so interesting, but at the same point, so important. Now, when you think about climate change and something that we talk about very often, we got to think about the crops, right? So crops over time have been able to develop to, I guess, the conditions that they are under. This obviously traditionally has happened at a fairly slow pace, and they've been able to do all of those adjustments. But when you look at climate change, we got to think about the crops that are available and whether they're actually going to be able to grow under the heightened temperatures around the world. So I've been watching a documentary series by Zac Efron. I'm a fan of his. I know a lot of people have some very strong things to say and are not big fans, but that's all good. I enjoy him. I enjoy him from his High School Musical days all the way up to the newest stuff. And basically he is trying to use his profile and I guess all of the various eyes and ears that are on him to try and do a little bit better, so try and actually contribute a little bit more. So this documentary series is called Down to Earth, and essentially it's looking at sustainability practices around the world. So essentially him and his co-hosts go around to different countries, look at things that they are doing, and I guess just make you aware of this. I've already learned so much. I'm only 5 episodes in, and I've learned quite a lot. So in this particular episode, Barry, he takes us to Peru, where there is, how's this, and listen to this and let me know what you think. The International Potato Center. Did you think anything like that existed?
I didn't, but now I want to visit more than anything, Chad, of course. That's amazing. And in Peru, of all places. What do they do there?
Yeah, so basically they have got a vault, and obviously they do various things. I think a lot of it is research, trying to get different strains of potatoes. I don't know if you know how many strains of potatoes there are, Barry, but there's an awful lot of them. I only know of the two, the sweet potato and, the normal potato. But Barry, in this particular vault that they've got this vault where they store 4,600 types of potatoes in a Vitrogene bank. How insane?
That is crazy. That is crazy. My only kind of idea when I think of potatoes, I think of moon food. I think of people growing it for go to space and whatnot. But to have 4,600 different types, that is just bizarre. And it's a reminder of how complicated this stuff actually is, right? In our minds, there's one potato, there's a sweet potato, like you say, and that's pretty much it. That is fascinating.
Yeah, there's so many genes within these potatoes that they can modify, genetically modify. So when we talk about their work in Africa, essentially they have rolled out a fast maturing buy a fortified potato that is able to address some of the hunger concerns that's happening in some countries in Africa. And I guess, just in terms of addressing the climate, looking at what kind of crops can grow at various temperatures, essentially what they do in this bank, and this bank is an earthquake-proof bank. So if something were to happen that literally maybe wiped out, I don't know, the whole of humanity, whatever the case is, there would still be this bank that would store all of these various seeds, and that they could theoretically get any of these particular strains of potatoes going again, which I think is fascinating. I think it's an important function. And, I know we don't like to talk about conspiracy theories. We don't like to talk about crops just suddenly being wiped out across the globe. But it is important that we have this kind of bank, don't you think?
Definitely, Chad. I mean, if we put aside the zombie movie kind of idea, it's more about things like what happened if nuclear war broke out, or what happened if there was giant climate change that really like tore apart the ecosystem. What happens if a pandemic like destroys civilization? Like there's all these very terrifying existential threats that we don't like to think about, but are still there. And if we want our human civilization to go on, we have to be buying these sorts of insurance policies. So I really like this idea of this having this vault where you try and like make sure you keep some sort of food source, some means of robust, really like well adapted food sources to ensure that if things go south and if things hit the fan, how do we rebuild from nothing? And this is one of those key components. That's interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the right way of thinking about it as an insurance policy, because that's exactly what it is. And I mean, just in terms of one of the little stats that I grabbed out of some of the articles that I read on the back of discovering this Doomsday earthquake-proof potato vault, was one that was released by the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, where they said that 75% of crop diversity was lost between 1900 and 2000. And they also estimate that a further 22% of the wild relatives of food crops will disappear by 2055 because of the changing climate. Now, that's within our lifetimes very much, Barry. And 22% is a big number.
We can't be complacent about this stuff. We really can't, right? The agriculture of today is going to be very different to the agriculture of 20 years down the line because, like you said, the climate is changing. Humans are changing the planet. They're changing the ecosystems and how they work. And so when we're trying to feed 7+ billion people, we have to be really careful about this stuff. And it's scary to hear that sort of diversity is being lost. But unfortunately, that's what's happening around the world when it comes to the species diversity in animals, in plants, in food. It's kind of a recurring story here. And unfortunately, we don't have the economic incentive to try and like fight climate change because it feels so far away sometimes. And it's still debated in these like high political areas about whether it's even real or not. And at some stage, we have to come together as humanity and be like, enough is enough. And at some point, we have to get to a stage where we have to start doing things differently to ensure that we don't get to a stage where the only thing left is potatoes, Chad. Because I don't know about you, but I could eat potatoes maybe for a day or two. To eat it for weeks at a time, just potatoes, I would struggle.
It's so true, Barry, so true. And I'm sure there are some other banks around the world, but we shouldn't be relying on our insurance policies, right? They should be there as insurance policies only. So yes, we need to kind of keep this message front of mind. Do go and check out this Netflix series. It's called Down to Earth with Zac Efron. And I think it's certainly worthwhile just having a little watch anyway.
We're soaring, flying. There's not a star in heaven that we can. I mean, he's High School Musical, guys. Go and watch it, for goodness sake.
Looking ahead.
Now, Barry, this one looks good.
It's one of those things that everyone has a love-hate relationship with, and that is PowerPoint presentations.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you've been in a school or you've worked at a corporate or basically across life, there has been a time in your life where you've had to either put together a PowerPoint presentation or watch someone else spew a PowerPoint presentation at you. And there is a very big gap between the good ones and the bad ones, Chad. And I think, unfortunately, 90% of them put us to sleep. Let's just be honest.
Yep.
I don't know what happened in your school days, Chad. But in mine, there were lots of occasions where people would bring their prepared speeches and they'd put the presentation on the board. And then they would just stand and read the presentation to us off of the projector screen.
Oh, no.
And then the teacher would be like, that's not the point. You need to be like more interactive. The screen's supposed to be a visual aid. It's not supposed to contain your entire speech. It really was a thing about learning how to be confident in your public speaking, but also learning how to use your slides in the best possible way. And if you do it really well, it can be really powerful. If you look at some of the best TED Talks around the world, they
Sure.
really do a great job at making sure they mingle the actual verbal communication with the visual aid. And so PowerPoint has become the skill that we never really taught about it. We never taught how to do good ones, but we kind of need it in our day-to-day lives, especially in work situations.
Definitely.
And Microsoft have decided to try and make it a little bit easier for us, Chad, with this new thing they're calling Presenter Coach.
Okay.
Basically, what happens is that you're going to click on this button that says Presenter Coach, and it's going to start recording you giving your speech. So you're going to go through the slides and rehearse the timings of the slides and talk through what you want to talk through, and it's going to be recording you as you go. Once you click stop, it's going to analyze exactly what you've just done and give you a bunch of tips as to how you can improve your performance. So
Okay.
tips might be don't read, for example. So it's going to check up on you and see how much of your thing was just reading off the slides and how much was actual original thoughts. The second thing, things like filler words, how many ums, how many likes, how many uhs, all of that good stuff. Like counting those and making sure that you're as crisp and as tight as possible. Looking at potentially sensitive phrases, so potentially when you are not gender neutral, potentially when you are saying things you maybe shouldn't be saying, it'll kind of call you out on that. It'll also look at the speed at which you talk. I know I struggle with this. I race. I will talk fast, and people will get lost behind me, right? And I'm sure if you're listening to the podcast, you understand that entirely because I talk very fast. It'll give you a sense as to whether you're talking too fast or you're talking too slowly, and some other ways to improve your presentations. And so basically, it's a really cool piece of AI, Chad, that's going to look at your speech in entirety and hopefully make you a little bit better while you're doing your practice sessions in your bedroom in front of your mirror.
This is so awesome. Thanks for bringing it to our attention. I know that PowerPoint has had the ability to, I guess, put live subtitles down on your PowerPoint presentation. So if you are potentially presenting to an audience that understands a different language, it can translate in real time. There's all these fantastic features. But this, I guess, takes it to the next level where you're using AI to actually grade you on your speech. And what an amazing tool to be able to have as a student today. Don't you wish you had this kind of tool growing up?
I really do, Chad. I really do. It's kind of unfair, to be honest, that the kids of today are going to have these AI tools, right? We had to kind of work our way through these long prepared speeches when we were like nervous in front of our classmates. This is one of those things where in the privacy of your own home, where there's no judging eyes, you can practice and practice and practice and have like a real speaking coach just for you. And what's really cool about this, Chad, is that obviously they just released this. So version 1 is in the market and it's going to have a few glitches and a few bugs. But the beauty of AI and the magic of AI is that the more people use it, the more powerful it's going to become. And so over time, it's going to become a better and a better and a better coach. And hopefully will improve the standard of presentations across the world. And that's a really good thing because we spend a lot of time listening to people give presentations. And if they can get better, even by 1 or 2%, it's going to have a huge productivity improvement and just general like life quality improvements. If you can sit through slightly fewer terrible presentations.
Well, I mean, on that point, I wonder whether TED Talks are going to start releasing an index, a score of the actual talk released by PowerPoint. So you know going in what it was graded by the system. But obviously, it's artificial intelligence. It's not always going to get it perfect. But that would be really quite cool to have a bank of, I guess, there's very successful presentations that has gone through the system available for you to consume in a central library. What do you think?
That would be really cool, Chad. But the problem is that these things are so subjective, right?
Yeah.
It's so subjective as to what is a good presentation. So some of the things we chatted about, speed and that sort of stuff, that's kind of some of the functional mechanics of your talk, and you can definitely improve on those things. But when it comes to the quality of the content, when it comes to kind of the matching of your target audience to what you're talking about,
Sure.
when it comes to your charisma or your personality, that's going to be very widely across the mark. And so I think what they're trying to do with this is trying to get the basics right. Trying to make sure your speed is good, you're kind of talking without the fillers, you're making sure that you are giving something that's more than just the slides you're presenting. But anything above that, the creativity, the charisma, any of that stuff, I don't know if you can score that.
Completely agree. And so if you do on the back of this, log into your PowerPoint, look at one of your presentations and do your record, and it spits out a really low score, just bear that in mind. Bear that in mind. It's just a computer. It might be missing out a lot. And so just, trudge on, take some feedback if there is constructive feedback. If not, well, just, drop it to the wayside and carry on with what you're doing. I think that's important to note. So while we're on looking ahead, Barry, and we like to talk about our favorite bits of tech, I made a bit of a uncharacteristic type of move this past week. And I've been judging those people like you who have got these little things hanging out of their ears that, look really strange, but we've got used to them. Funny enough, they've become fairly normal to see. And I bought myself a pair of AirPods.
It's really cool, Chad. And they look even less conspicuous than mine because mine are like the originals. So they look much longer in my ears and they do look a little bit silly sometimes. But you bought the ones that are a little bit shorter. And so I'm imagining they look a little bit better. And I'm very curious to hear your thoughts because one of the big changes with the AirPods Pro is that they brought in noise cancellation.
Yep.
And that was kind of the big feature change compared to the ones that I have in my ears. And from my perspective, I have found these products to be exceptional.
Yeah.
Across all my traveling last year, they were really a really integral part of my travel. And the number of conferences and business calls I was on with these things in train stations, in buses, like traveling around the world was incredible. And they still are working perfectly, and they're one of the best products I bought in a long time.
Yep.
And so to hear that the AirPods Pro is something that you've bought makes me excited, and I want to hear about your experience, both good and bad, Chad.
Absolutely. So you're right. They are slightly smaller in terms of, I guess, how long they extend out of your ear. But they are still signature AirPods. You'll see someone walking around and you'll be like, those are AirPods. So they've kind of kept the same, I guess, structure, although they have made it a little bit smaller. So one of the reasons why I never got into the original AirPod line was the fit. So I think I had tried some on in the Apple store. And I don't know why, but the stock Apple headphones have just never fit nicely in my ears. They're quite loose. I know some people don't struggle with that at all, but I've always struggled with that. So if ever going for these kinds of in-ear headphones or earphones, I would always go for the ones that have the rubber suction cups in them. So you can actually, put it in and you've got that good seal. So that's one of the other things that they've changed with the AirPods Pro is that they've got that little bit of suction. There's 3 sizes, I think, that they give you, and you can, select your size. And it's really quite comfortable. It really, really is. It fits in. I haven't even tried the other sizes, just the one that came straight out the box. Fits really nicely in. So I tried it out basically for my flight. So it was a 3-hour flight. And I'd heard a lot of people talk about noise cancelling. You and I, Barry, have been talking about it for ages. I've been wanting to buy a pair for so long. And in fact, 2 weeks ago, the latest Sony over-ear noise cancelling headphones were released. The WH-1000XM4s? I think that's the name. It's a crazy long name. A lot of people say...
I don't understand. Why do they do that with names, Chad? Why do they make them so crazy? It's like you're reading a serial number off the back of your router. Like, why don't they have a catchy name for these things? I will never understand that.
No one will. No one will understand it. I've seen people say that they literally threw their keyboard out onto the floor and whatever came through on the screen, that's what they went with. And I mean, it does feel like that. It really does. But they were released 2 weeks ago, and I actually went into my local tech store, and even, in COVID times, I tried them on, checked them out, looked at extensive amounts of reviews, those versus the Bose 700s, etc., etc., etc. And I don't know why I found myself just not being enticed by any of those. I was at the airport looking at a pair of AirPods, and the size, it's just the size, the convenience, the fact that you can put them into your pockets, Barry. And I think that's, that's why you've been able to get such a big amount of mileage out of yours as well. It's just that form factor. And the case that charges them, you just charge the case, you throw them in and, get a top up in battery life wherever you are. You don't need a power bank with you, etc., etc. I think they've just nailed so many things and so many levels. And yeah, they've just produced a fantastic product here.
Apple are just so good at understanding what their users are actually going to use it for.
Yep.
And being able to fit their products into the lifestyle of the user. They know that they were sacrificing sound quality, right? If you're a music head and you want to hear that complete surround sound, perfect kind of MP3 quality, you're not going to get that in AirPods. But you're not buying it because of that.
No.
You're buying it for the convenience of being able, like you said, to put it in your jeans pockets. It's tiny. It's absolutely tiny. And it's so portable and so well put together. The charging case is amazing. If my AirPods die, I can chuck them in the charging case for a good 10 minutes and it can give me another 40% battery life.
Amazing.
And that's an amazing piece of technology.
Yep.
And that's why these things have become absolutely integral to my life. And I use them every single day without fail.
Yep.
So we feel like we sound like Apple shills again, Chad. And people are going to think we're biased. And maybe we are. But these products are just so good. Like the AirPods are such a good piece of technology. And for anyone who is traveling, or anyone is like running around town, it really makes a lot of sense instead of having to carry around some of the bigger over-ear headphones.
Definitely. Definitely, especially when you're traveling on a fairly short holiday. You're not taking a whole bunch of stuff with you. Those over-ear headphones are big. They take up a lot of space. And so that's why I opted for these. But one of the very, very important things for me, because I was getting into noise cancelling, is I went up to two of the sales reps independently when they were not together. And I asked them, if the Bose 700s are 100% of noise cancelling, where would you grade the AirPod Pros? And both of them said 70 to 80% range. So they cover a fairly significant bit of noise cancelling. And when I found myself on the plane, tuning it on, watching a YouTube video with not extremely loud sound, it truly, truly is incredible how good this noise cancelling is. You literally are in your own little bubble. You cannot hear any of the jets. And I think all of the other little things that they get so well in this is when, for example, when my fiance tapped me wanting to talk, I pull one out of my ear and suddenly the noise cancelling is off. My music or my video stops immediately. It just all works. And as soon as I put it back in my ear, it's all playing again. It's just all those integrations that are amazing. Use it on my laptop, use it on my MacBook. And funny enough, I didn't find any significant lag. Whenever I use a Bluetooth device, so for example, if I was using these Bose headphones to edit video, for example, I find a big lag between my talking on the screen and my talking in the ear. And for some reason, Apple's been able to minimize that lag to an insane amount in these AirPod Pros. So anyway, I could go on for days and days because I do love them. They are expensive, yes, but they are worth every single penny.
Yeah, it's the benefits of the Apple ecosystem once again. It's like the reason they can do all of this stuff because all the products tie into each other so nicely. And they're designed to be used together. And so, like you say, it just works. When you're switching between devices, it works. Pulling out the ear, it works. The pausing and all that good stuff. And you simply can't get away with that if you've got devices that aren't super tightly designed together. And yeah, they are expensive, like you say. But for me, I think it's Apple's best product of the last 3 or 4 years, to be honest. If I look at all the products they've released in the last little bit, I think that at the time, people were looking at it like, oh, that looks terrible and it's too expensive. But if you look around you, they have really taken over. And you see them, once you start looking for them, you see them everywhere.
And also the importance now, Barry, of video calls, right? The importance of video calls, whether you're taking it on your mobile, whether you're taking it on your laptop. A lot of these, noise cancelling or even other Bluetooth headphones, the microphones are not great for video calls. Whereas AirPods have crisp, clear microphones. I mean, it's the way that we talk every week.
Chad, I've used these for must be thousands of video calls at this stage. Like all my meetings, all the conferences, all the conference calls, anything, I use these things. Yep. And they've never, ever given me any issues, touch wood. So it's one of those things where they're reliable. Like you say, they're high quality when it comes to the microphone, the noise cancellation, etc. And they're so convenient. Just pop them in my little dental floss case and put it in my pocket, and I'm good to go. There's something so magical about that experience, rather than carrying around the over-ear headphones. And so, for anyone who's in the market for wireless headphones, I don't think you can go wrong with them. One other thing I want to say is that I even use them when I'm exercising, Chad.
Okay.
So when I'm running, when I'm at the gym, and I've been fine. I know the fit is not perfect for everybody. But for me, they stay in my ears if I'm running, if I'm sprinting, if I'm going up a hill, if I'm on the treadmill, whatever it is. And so I've used them for absolutely everything.
Amazing.
And I have nothing bad to say about them.
Well, that's good to know because, I always struggle whenever I'm at gym and, for example, bench pressing or whatever the case is. You've got those headphones where they're wireless, but they wrap around your neck. And whenever you do that, they fall off. They fall off. So to be able to actually wear them to gym, I'm very excited to be able to do that as well. Just what a great product so far, and I'm just excited. It's one of those where if you're spending your money on a physical item, make sure that you get value out from it. And this is one of those things that just gives you so much value. So yeah, we could talk all day about Apple, and
we probably have.
We probably have, and it's probably then the right time to turn off our record buttons and wrap up episode 42.
It's been good to be back, Chad. I know, 2 weeks break, we all refreshed and we're back to normal. So really good to see you again, to hear all the news and whatnot. I think across the pond is an exciting journey, and it kind of feels like season 2. So I'm looking forward to taking this forward into the next level. If you have made it this far, you are a champion as always. We really appreciate you, and we hope we'll see you next week for the next episode.
Absolutely. And if you know anyone who you think will enjoy listening to us as well as much as you do, send them our way. We would like to have them as part of the Across the Pond family. And yeah, I'm sure they can definitely join in every week. That's all for today, folks. We'll see you next week.
Across the pond.